Hey, friends and comic book people. It is I, Sleepy Reader, Damien, back for another one of my comic book countdowns, which I like to always remind people are 100% subjective, so much so that they are based on my particular feelings as I read them, my level of enjoyment for whatever reason, and often may even contradict what I might intellectually think was the better comic. It's all about the reading experience for me, especially in these countdowns. So I had 10 comic books. I got to say, I pretty much enjoyed all of them. But maybe there were a bottom 3 that I enjoyed less than the rest. And then and always it's a little bit tricky to order them. And it was particularly tricky this time at the top of the list to order either. And as I often say these days, I had meant to film this a few days ago. Now my excuse is just all the time at home with my 11-year-old daughter. We do school at home. We try to do fun things too. We try to do family things. We watch a lot of TV together so that it's not lonely. And that's watching TV that my daughter mostly likes, and sometimes that my wife likes, occasionally picked by me. And so I just find less time than ever for reading. During her school time or when she's playing a video game, I go off and do the laundry or make the next meal, because we're having all 3 meals every day at home. And I'm keeping very busy doing a lot of just maintenance of life, I guess is how it feels. Happy day. We did get some hand sanitizer today, although I think it's supposed to be a little too weak to get rid of the coronavirus, but maybe it helps a little bit. In a lot of ways, I'm enjoying just spending all this time with my daughter, but in other ways, I'm concerned, particularly for how hard it's going to be when she does go back to school, whenever that is, if that's this spring or next fall. My wife said something about a rumor that they might do school in the summer instead, which would really kind of wreck a lot of things that we've been looking forward to, like arts camps and things like that my daughter was going to do. But anyway, that's kind of where I am. I don't know about your kids, if you have young kids, but it's getting more and more difficult. Not horrendously difficult, but just you can only push them so far. Then we have to do a lot of stuff that she just wants to do. Anyway, more venting. This seems to be now my regular thing. Excuse me. Some dust in my throat. Seems to be my regular thing now to vent at the beginning of these videos. Kind of my excuse, because I keep hearing people talking about, oh, now I have time to catch up on all this reading and do all this stuff. What are you doing, Damien? And I'm not catching up on things. Or I'd love to, be alone, be a hermit, and binge all these shows and that kind of thing, but don't have the time for it. But I'm having a good time, and I'm slowly going to get some chance to catch up on some reading, I hope. So, got this stack. Coming in, no surprise for people who've been watching, I put at number 10, the Legion of Superheroes, which remains basically the same story. My story of why I rank it low is the art is great, the coloring is, very good. I certainly, the art just stays at a level that I certainly don't want to drop this book. I'm working really hard to like it, but also because any nice looking Legion book, I really have a craving for that. I now sense that I can start to sense where Brian Michael Bendis' meandering story is going, and he's trying in his weird, loopy way to sort of reestablish give kind of a new meaning to the existence of the Legion, but still keep it within that old idea that it was inspired by Superman. And I think he wants to explain the galactic political situation that it comes out of and all of that. And all of that is very admirable. So I wish it was done in a more readable way. And in this issue, I particularly noticed that everything, you could just read this story out loud to somebody and not have them see the pictures, and I think they would get the same story, that everything is just illustrating information except it's not straightforward information, it's loopy information, but looping around to different characters and different plot lines, and yet it all is an info dump of what Bendis wants us to tell, so that the artists are just having to make interesting ways of giving backgrounds and visual aids to basically long conversations, which I know long conversations are Bendis' thing, but there's literally nothing except that it looks pretty that needs to be a comic here in a way. So I don't know what else to say, but as I talk about it, I kind of enjoy talking about it, so maybe it's unfair to put it at number 10. Maybe I engage with it at some level as I critique it and wish it was something else, but look for the bits that I want it to be. Does this guy look like a young Barack Obama on there, this new version of Lightning Lad? I don't know, maybe that's my imagination. But, so yeah, it's a weird comic book. It's weird to think that this writer is supposedly like the leading mainstream writer, because it's weird writing, and I'm enjoying talking about it. At number 9 was Exo Manowar. This was in my pull list, and I didn't really intend to get it. I had Exo Manowar by Matt Kindt. It ran for about 30 issues. That's what was on my pull list. I always forget. I better tell them to cut things from my pull list when they end, because they'll probably reboot again and probably not be the comic I want anymore, which is the case here. It's a different style of art, different kind of story, different writer, of course, Dennis Hopeless Hallam. And really, as I think about it, a lot of it was my expectations. I wanted that grand Planet Hulk, planetary adventure kind of style, Conan on another planet kind of style story that this was under Matt Kindt. And now what I think Dennis Hopeless is trying to do is kind of reestablish Man of War as a Earth-based hero who has a new little community of a cast of characters, supporting cast of characters, and a community that he's trying to be a part of. And if you did the art slightly differently, I think it might remind me of certain Marvel, or maybe Marvel and DC comics of the 80s. So that shouldn't be a bad thing. It didn't click with me, and maybe I just had other expectations, and I wasn't super enamored with his new supporting cast of characters and the what have you. I feel like in a way my judgment of it is unfair, because I wanted what I had before. So this could turn out to be a really good series. It's hard to tell from the first issue, but I think I'm going to pull it from my list, because for all my claiming I want comics like they were in the old days, this is a lot like a comic in the old days, and I'm not that interested. But sometimes, whatever the style of comic, it either clicks with you or it doesn't. But I can see maybe, coming back to it someday, maybe, and enjoying it when I love this cover, and there's that bat, looks like the bat plane. My daughter pointed that out to me. It looks like the bat plane there, but it's actually some alien spaceship. And there is a sense of humor to this and all. And maybe it's the art, which feels pretty generic, which then makes me view the story as more generic than it really is. I'm not sure. And because this is a story that is mostly doing the heavy lifting of setting up, if it goes on long enough, a kind of whole, traditional superhero scenario for our hapless superhero, it might prove stronger. In the back, I just remembered there's some kind of preview for another comic. I don't know about you. I never read previews at the backs of comics. I'll look at the art, and if the art looks really fantastic, then I might add the comic to my pull list. If it looks kind of generic, I won't. But I want to read a whole issue. I don't like reading 4 pages. I'd rather them promote their comics in some other way, I guess. I do like getting a peek at the artwork coming up. So then at number 8 was Amethyst. So all 3 of these were kind of, in a bad. They were all kind of evenly, somewhat entertaining, interesting for particular reasons, but also a little didn't get me very excited. And I feel the worst about Amethyst, so I did put it the highest of them. It is kind of cool art, but somehow it's not the art I wanted. And maybe I'm slowly getting used to that idea. And I don't think I like the color palettes. It's not that I'm against purples and pinks, but it's just the shades of them that I don't like here, I guess, if that makes sense. And the darker scenes kind of are unappealing. And I think Amy Reeder is doing her own coloring. I should double check that. But I believe so. She's the only name listed on the cover. So it's pretty amazing she's doing full art, color, and writing. I think this is monthly. There's another example of a page spread where I don't dig the colors that much. There's a certain style of coloring where it feels like there's a film over the color, like a grayish tone on top of the color that brings me down. But there's some cool aspects in here. This woman who's riding a giant caterpillar that turns out to move really fast. And as the issue continued, it charmed me more. There was some this sort of take time out from the plot and just have this character talk to her about Earth, where it turns out there's people in Gem World who are obsessed by Earth and want to know every detail about this mysterious other dimension and that kind of thing. And I thought it was very cool. And so the story kind of progressed in an interesting, funny way near the end of this issue. So it's kind of promising heading towards in future issues. Now this week, at one point, my daughter and I sat down, and I got to get her to read more comics herself, but she's so used to the idea that I read comics to her. So I started reading the first issue of Amethyst to her, and she lost interest halfway through. Kids are tough critics, tough audiences. But I think if we break through further, that she may start to like this Amethyst. Interesting revelation at the back that I'll avoid. But I think also, and maybe it's because Amy Reeder, her only other writing has been with a partner, there's maybe a rhythm to the story that she's just reaching towards and may get her mojo of getting that comic book rhythm going better as she goes along. So I have some hopes for Amethyst. Was it listed as a 12-issue series? Or am I just thinking that because a lot of Wonder comics have been 12-issue series? A lot of them actually started out as 6-issue series and then got expanded with for good sales. So now we kind of launch into the middle of the pack. And at the bottom of the middle of the pack, these were, as I said, all 10 were comics I liked. But now we're getting to comics I really liked a lot. Issue 3 of Usagi Yojimbo's Color Classics. It really suffers from the fact that I like the current Usagi way better. But it's interesting to see what he did and where he's progressed to. And I think he's a great example, he being Stan Sakai, who writes and draws this for what? This is an issue from, does it say here somewhere? I think it's from like 87 or 88. He has done this steadily, I think mostly monthly, for more than 2 decades, and he has really become a master at what he does. And he was a talented younger artist at this point, younger artist and writer, and it's still a very good story. We're kind of in the middle of a story here, and I missed issue 2. I actually grabbed issue 3 just because of the comic store was going to close down, and so I might as well just grab a lot of extra comics. So even though I'd said Usagi Yojimbo Color Classics, I was going to just wait for a hardback, and I probably still will buy a hardback of it if one comes out. I'm not sure if I'll keep buying the individual issues, but I had fun reading this issue. But I just kept thinking how I just kept comparing it to the current day Usagi, which this has a pretty good story rhythm, but there's just something perfect about the way Stam Sakai now paces his stories. And while the art here is very good, it's kind of a different style. It definitely feels like the Funny Animal style, or not Funny Animal, but the Animal comic book character style of the 80s. And there's something more elegant and more simplified about the current Usagi, which you can see on the cover. Somehow more cartoony, but more serious and more expressive. It kind of challenges my ability to verbalize things, the difference between these classics, these early Usagi stories, and the current ones. But it's really interesting. I'm tempted to keep picking them up just because it's fun to compare. But do I really need to double dip completely? So then, in at number 6 is Once and Future. Beautiful cover there. Dan Mora is a great artist. It's kind of weird that he has not been scooped up by the bigger publishers. I think he's been at Boom mostly. Maybe he has a contract with Boom. But I don't know if you can see the problem here. I feel kind of bad because I've often stated, including quite recently, that Tamara Bonvillain is one of my very favorite colorists. And suddenly I'm not very happy with the coloring in this issue. I get that maybe she's decided to go with a darker look, but it doesn't work as well for me. I get lost in these pages more, and she's one of the artists who always improved my reading, one of the color artists who always improved my reading experience, page by page, and now it's just not quite working. There's some nice panels and everything here, but I almost feel like did she send the wrong files before she finished adjusting everything just right? I'm not sure what's going on, or just a different approach that she's decided to take that is just doesn't work as well for me. I can't remember now, but there were some moments in here where I wasn't sure what happened enough, maybe in some of these fight scenes, because maybe it was obscured a little by the color. And Kieran Gillen is a good writer, but he is the type of writer who wants you to figure things out from the pictures more than him telling you. And sometimes I want to be told a little more what happened. But despite these complaints, I really enjoyed this. I really like Dan Mora's art. I get a big kick out of this old lady Buffy and her. It's not literally Buffy, but that's what I think of her as. Old lady Buffy and her grandson and some other relatives who they didn't know about, I think. Oh, here's a page where it's hard to tell where we are, what's going on a little bit. It seems like a flaw in a comic book where you have to go back and re-look at things to figure out what's going on, because the great thing about comics is how quickly and how much information they give you so fast. So anyway, still a good comic. Could have easily, if you're looking to read Once and Future, the first trade, you can read the first trade. You don't have to read any more. You've got the whole story there. Okay, the next one is the perfect example of my subjectivity versus what I might think intellectually. Tomorrow by Peter Milligan and a very good art team that I've never heard of before, Jesus Herva and James Devlin. I think James Devlin's the color artist. Tomorrow from the Karen Berger line of books at Dark Horse may have been technically the most well-done comic I read this week. But I didn't enjoy it that much. It was not in my top tier of enjoyment, and I put it at number 5. And the reason is, and I just got issue 1, or I just read issue 1 too, also. My computer just went to sleep for a second there. So I read issue 1 and issue 2 in a row, and so I'm not quite sure. In my mind, both issues kind of go together, but it's a really cool story about an apocalypse of a virus that kills most adults and leaves children alive. And that hits very close to home at the moment. It's kind of weird that Peter Milligan was probably, started writing this 6 months ago or something, and then it comes out at a time when something kind of like it is happening. But his idea is basically a variation on Lord of the Flies, that book by William Golding where a bunch of boys get shipwrecked on an island and all become crazy savages. And so it's children becoming crazy savages, and at least as a major thread in the story. And I just found that hard to take right now, that idea that our children will all become brutal barbarians should we all die. So that was my basic reason for putting it down lower. I think it's a really well-made comic. It's dealing a bit in extremes and kind of apocalypse action movie cliches to a certain extent, but in a very sophisticated way also. But since we're faced with a real pandemic, his unsubtle use of extremes was sort of painful for me and irritated me a bit. What if a lot of people really die from this pandemic, and what will happen to the world? I now want a more nuanced view of that, and a more thought out view of what that might be like. And there's a certain tabloid shockingness to all of this. But, viewed at some other point, that would have been probably my favorite comic of the week. So I'm going to put in a much lighter comic coming ahead of it at number 4. The final issue of Edgar Allan Poe's Snifter of Terror, Volume 2. And I guess if they weren't just joking, the next incarnation of this series is going to be called the Snifter of Blood. I don't know if they were really serious about that. It's always hard to tell with Ahoy Comics when they're kind of pulling your leg and when they're telling the truth. Not a super fan of this cover. Obviously, it's transposing Edgar Allan Poe and Donald Trump and turning Putin into the Raven who's talking to him about what to write. It's not for political reasons that I don't like it. I just think it's kind of ugly. But I have, in general, loved their spoofy, jokey covers with Edgar Allan Poe put into all kinds of weird, famous images. And so there was nothing, mind-blowingly great in here, but I just had fun reading all the stories, and I was grateful for that fun. There's one weird, kind of sick, gruesome version of the background to the Purloined Letter, which includes the chopping up of a child, which was pretty tough stuff for me in a way, but I got into the spirit of it and the sick humor of it and was able to deal with it. And then there was this interesting, if a little bit convoluted, concept from Paul Cornell of what if Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was not written by a Scot. I didn't know Robert Louis Stevenson was a Scot, and I didn't know how that would affect it. So there's a lot of subtleties of perhaps British humor about what Brits themselves are like compared to Scots. But I could pick up on the gist of it, which was that the shocking things that Mr. Hyde would do would be very mildly shocking things like drinking the wrong kind of wine at a party or not playing cricket the way you're supposed to. And aspects of things like about cricket and stuff, I really didn't get that joke. There was interesting Oscar Wilde appearance and stuff. So I just had fun reading that. The art in this one wasn't as good as in the first one. The art in the first one was very good. And then I don't think I've read all the... Oh yeah, I loved this superhero horoscopes. That was very clever and fun to read. So if you're picking up Ahoy comics and you haven't yet, you should just go back to your Ahoy issues if you have all that extra time most people seem to have right now, and read all the prose pieces, because they actually are some of the best short fiction that I've read in a long time. And then there was an extra long Poe versus the Black Cat, which is a bizarre kind of take on the Mad Magazine Spy versus Spy, and was very fun. So all around, as often is the case from Ahoy, a really fun package. Not the most brilliant comic in the world, but I just really had fun with it. Okay, now my top three, which were all really tightly packed together. At number 3, I'm putting the Hulk. Number 750, or number 33. And I'm puzzled by that 750, because when did the Hulk first have his own magazine? I'm thinking 1963, 1964. There could not have been 700. And I know it was canceled for quite a while before they restarted it. So there cannot have been 750 issues of the Hulk. I don't know how they're counting this, where they get their 750. Because The Flash was just up to 750 issues, wasn't he, a few weeks ago? But anyway, they used the excuse to give us another oversized issue. And this is often my complaint about the Hulk when they have guest artists, that they don't fit in. But this time the guest artist who did some of the extra bits of art was, let's see if I can find it. They had plenty of Joe Bennett, the regular artist, and then the guest artist was Nick Patera, drawing inside the Hulk's mind, and he was a great choice for that. He's such a wacky, crazy artist, that it was really cool to see how he decided to present the inside of Hulk's brain. And this issue provides a fairly enjoyable sort of mini conclusion or semi-conclusion to the Zemnu storyline, although and looks like very much a conclusion to the storyline about what's his name, Agar, the Minotaur who runs Roxxon. What's his name? I always forget his name, even though he has kind of a cool name. But full of cool art by both artists and a fun, wacky storyline. And the only reason why I wouldn't put this at number 1 is just that what the Immortal Hulk is about and where it's going have just become a bit confused from some of the issues they've done in the last, starting with issue 25 and since then. So I can't enjoy it quite as much as I used to, just by that sense of like you're on uneven ground or mushy ground. You don't know when, as you take each step in the Hulk story, whether you're going in a direction that you're going to like or not. So I just sort of view it with a little suspicion, even though this was a great issue. Love that cover by Alex Ross. I think a lot of the best current cover work by Ross, and some of his best cover work ever, has been on the Immortal Hulk, because he's taken a storytelling approach. I mean, this is a scene that comes directly out of the story and is full of the spirit of the story, the wacky craziness of it all. So I love it. Okay, and so then I'm not really happy of the ordering I chose of things, but I can't decide what the right order would really be. Justice League Dark, number 21, was very good. I missed the art by, was it Kyle Holtz in the last issue? So it was a bit of a hard transition, but actually the art is very beautiful by Martinez Bueno. Doesn't Bueno mean good? Is his last name actually Good? Maybe I'm wrong. So I hope that maybe Kyle Holtz is in the mix, that we'll be seeing more Kyle Holtz. But this looks very nice, very nicely colored too, I'm realizing, by June Chung. And the story is continuing to be... Oh, and there was a bunch of creative pages like this one where Wonder Woman is trying to deal with things quickly. Thought that was a great way to show that. So now this Ram V has taken over most of the writing. Tinian is still in on the sort of as a co-plotter, but it looks like Ram V was a really good choice to take over from Tinian, and so I'm looking forward to many more good issues of. Oh, look at that! That was a really cool page. Many more good issues. It feels that it bodes well for many more good issues of what has already been one of my top 3 DC comics and one of my favorite superhero comics right now. So yeah, and so this ranks high both for itself and for all the good feeling I have for 21 issues of a really fun to read series. So my last choice is controversial to myself. It's Hidden Society number 2. My shop never got me Hidden Society number 1. Maybe it was my fault. He suggested maybe I asked for it too late. Anyway, in any case, when I got number 2 and shops were all closed down, so I couldn't go to my backup shops to look for number 1, I broke down and I got it digitally from Dark Horse. And they seem to be selling first issues of series for 99 cents. So I will probably, since I've only spent 99 cents on digital, when I get a chance, and I'm enjoying this so much, I will probably want to get issue number 1 physically. And or maybe if this comes out in a hardback, I think I might really like that. So one thing that... So my iPad that I normally read comics on was not available. Probably my daughter was doing something on it. So I read it on my 27-inch screen on my computer, and it looked so beautiful, the art and coloring, that I was deeply entranced by it. I mean, the art is by Raphael Albuquerque, who's always a really great artist for me, especially on his indie work. Like he did his own comic before from Dark Horse called 8. I think that's what it was called, and that was beautiful and well told. He's a good writer, too, so he should write more comics. But I really enjoyed this artwork, and I feel kind of bad, but I enjoyed it even more, maybe because the colors worked better digitally. This is very well colored either way, digitally or physically. But and I had it, blown up at 27 inches, a 27-inch wide page. But it's a well done but kind of light magic story, if you know what I mean. It's not trying to... it's a fun adventure. It's not trying to drag you down into anything depressing or anything like that. I really just enjoyed it as a fun adventure. You can sort of see little bits here. I was noticing as I was reading it, and particularly noticing it when I was looking at the super blown up art, that there's a lot of touches of Will Eisner about Albuquerque's art. Raphael Albuquerque. And the writer, I've never heard of him, is Raphael Scavone. Yeah, Scavone or Scavone. You can see the credits up there. It's funny that they both have the same first name. I assume Raphael Albuquerque is Spanish or from a Spanish-speaking country. I don't know for sure if I'm right about that. And perhaps this is a friend of his from his own hometown. Now there is beautiful coloring, and the choices and the way the blues look here on this whole page look wonderful. Oh, there's a face right there of the old man with his beard that looks so Will Eisner-ish to me, but in a good way, not like I copied Will Eisner, but I absorbed Will Eisner. Now here, while I'm complaining about coloring, like I find in an artist who's as good as Albuquerque that I don't want these gradations of shade all over the face, as if the colorist is painting the face on top of his drawing. But I'm sure that's a matter of taste, and a lot of people do like that. But I feel like Albuquerque has such nice line work. But basically a motley crew of people who don't realize fully what their magical powers are being brought together to fight this hidden magical battle to save the Earth. And so there's nothing really original about it. And in other hands, I might have poo-pooed it and said, this is just a minor story. But I'm really enjoying it. Dark Horse Comics, as one of my favorite viewers, Luther Manning, mentioned, seems to be making quite the comeback lately. I mean, I'm really liking a lot of the comics they're putting out. My erstwhile number one, Tomorrow, was also from Dark Horse, and a lot of my top comics every week now seem to be Dark Horse comics. So I'm trying to really keep an eye on them. Of course, I have to take a break from all that. So I think if I have time, I have plenty of other things I want to do videos about. Things I'm reading and things I'm thinking about. I picked up at the shop also this past Wednesday this new Spirit volume, which is a celebration, a 80th anniversary celebration. I think basically this is another really good primer for people who want to get to know the Spirit more. They start with this origin story of the Spirit, which is probably not one of the best Spirit stories, but still it's good to kind of have an understanding of his origin. I think they retold his origin several times. And then they have all kinds of great classic stories. This one I did not recall. I don't know if I read it before. It's a kind of postmodern Spirit story where the Spirit and Dolan cast are finding pages in Will Eisner's studio, explaining that Will Eisner has perhaps been killed by one of the characters. And there are other classic stories in here. I haven't reread them all yet. There's two colorists that they brought in here, and I think one is Laura Martin and one is Jeremy Cox. And I'm just from looking through it, I'm not liking. I don't know which stories are Jeremy Cox. I'm not liking the Jeremy Cox choices in coloring the Spirit. This is Jeremy Cox here. I just think Eisner's line work is so important in his blacks and everything that you don't want to undercut them with the colors and make the colors sort of stand above them somehow. So I think Laura Martin does a much better job in the coloring. It would have been fun for them to get 5 or 6 colorists to do it, each one doing one. Let's see, I'm guessing this one is Laura Martin also, because that looks good to me. This is a famous one where Will Eisner makes fun of little Abner. I've seen many editions of that. Oh, and this is another classic one, The Strange Case of Mrs. Paraffin. Let's see, somewhere it lists here. Okay. Yeah, this was also colored by Laura Martin. But both of these modern colorists, I think, don't do it as much justice as I would like to see. Here's the other one by Jeremy Cox. An interesting thing here. Oh, there's the kind of end pages, which I like. That's perhaps, it's hard to say what is the most famous story, but this is perhaps it, where this guy learns to fly, and he's flying around, but no one notices. But they have a note here, which I guess is important to stay, but it's in tiny print. This is kind of why I've for years since I started this channel thought I will do a big video about the Spirit, but I always felt like I have to address the racism of the character Ebony in particular in this comic, and I always shied away from dealing with that, and then I felt like I can't say I've really dug into the Spirit without somehow finding a way to deal with that. But they write, the Spirit was produced from 1940 through 1952 and reflects the accepted sensibilities of the period, sensibilities that may strike today's reader as outdated. That's a real understatement. Specifically, readers may find the depiction of the Spirit's sidekick, Ebony, to be racially insensitive. Deeply so, I would say. Eisner himself grew uncomfortable with what he perceived as feeding a racial stereotype, finally abandoning the character altogether in 1949. In the interest of historical accuracy, we have chosen to preserve these stories as they were originally presented, which should not be interpreted as condoning the cultural limitations of the time. It is kind of sad that for all his genius, Eisner was not able to see that particular flaw in the, quote, comedy of the blackface. I'm not showing a blackface here, actually. Is there? I don't know if there's really a prominent Ebony story anyway. That's funny. Flipping through it, I don't see Ebony. He must be in here somewhere since they talk about not taking him out. Now, the weird thing for me in Ebony is that while I view the way Ebony is drawn as sort of hard to comprehend how they would do that, I love him as a character. He was a really cool part of the Spirit stories, and I loved the Ebony solo stories and things like that. And I feel bad about that in a way. I don't know how to reconcile it entirely. So, and then some other stuff I got, since I'm just going on longer and longer and longer, 41 minutes already. I made a big order to Tomorrow's. They were having a sale. They mentioned somewhere that, now we can't sell anything in the shops and we have no cash flow, which is a problem for everybody, of course, but I love the Tomorrow's products. I usually don't buy them in the store anyway, because if I buy them directly from them, I get the digital edition and the regular edition. And they were doing a lot of these, not all of them that I got were discounted, but a lot of them were discounted pretty heavily, trying to sell off some of their stock, I guess, during this difficult time. So I got a bunch of different back issues. I already have a ton of, by back issues, I mean the magazine back issue, which mostly focuses on the Bronze Age. It hits on the Silver Age occasionally. In theory, Alter Ego is the book for the Golden Age and the Silver Age. I don't really like Alter Ego's articles nearly as well as I like back issue. So I find myself buying back issue all the time, even though I want more stuff about the Silver Age too. Anyway, this is their 100th issue. And one thing that grabbed me, it has an article about Alan Light and the buyer's guide for comic book fandom, which I talked about in a recent hangout. I showed some buyer's guides that I bought, and I'm eager to read all about them. So that was issue 100. I got issue 92, which is about Bronze Age horror magazines. Obviously, on the cover there, they've got The Phantom Stranger and The Swamp Thing. They talk about, on the cover, they're going to do The Living Mummy, Marvel horror anthologies, Phantom Stranger team-ups, The Witching Hour, Swamp Thing in Hollywood, Swamp Thing revival of 1982. I just love all that stuff. I guess just because it's stuff I was fascinated with as a kid, and now I'm learning much more depth about all of it. Featuring, Rich Buckler, Val Myrick, Tom Yeats, all these people. So if you're a nostalgia, I guess I probably shouldn't have put this in a video about my new comics, because my nostalgia friends may not watch so many of my new comic videos. Here's a Christmas in the Bronze Age. I love that drawing of Kingpin disguised as Santa Claus. That's hilarious. That's issue number 85. So I think the ones that were on sale, the newer issues, not all of the issues were, but a lot of the issues I bought were on sale for about $5.50, I believe. But then you have to pay a little postage. They got to me real quick, too, which made me think, well, they're not as busy at their warehouse as they normally are, perhaps. Here's issue number 84, Supergirl in the Bronze Age. I'm hoping there'll be some fun stuff to flip through for both me and my daughter here, because we're more interested in Supergirl in the Silver Age, though. Bronze Age was a less compelling time, although we have read some good Bronze Age Supergirl comics. There were bits and pieces that were good. They kept starting and restarting stories at first. It looks like there's other stuff in here, too. Maybe they hit up on some other female-led stories of the Bronze Age. And then we've got a, from the groovy 70s to the big 80s, Archie comics in the Bronze Age. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to find a lot of information about what was going on in the world of Archie comics. So I'm kind of psyched that there's a whole magazine devoted to that, a whole issue of the magazine. And then there is the All Captains issue. So Captain Marvel, Captain Carrot, Captain Marvel, Captain Storm and the Losers, never heard of them, Captain Universe, Captain Victory. So psyched for that. And we've got... I don't know if this is a Captain America issue or it says featuring retrospectives of Archie Goodwin and Mark Gruenwald. I think are they both dead? Is Mark Gruenwald dead? I know Archie Goodwin died. And that was a huge loss for the comic book world because he was so beloved. And so anyway, we'll have to see what this one is about. I grabbed this one. Again, it was like $5.50, and I love this Mike Zeck cover. Mike Zeck was a great Captain America artist. And then a back issue all about the Hulk in the Bronze Age, with a cover by the now late Herb Trimpe, who's my favorite Hulk artist. I know there are lots of fans of the Sal Buscema Hulk work, and that is definitely a good choice of favorite Hulk work. But for me, Trimpe. But there's I've glanced through this. There's a long article on Herb Trimpe, and there's articles on all kinds of other parts of the Bronze Age Hulk, including the Sal Buscema days. So anyway, that was very cool. And then this one, I mean, how could you not grab that cover? Look at that. That's a beauty, again by Alex Ross, number 111. I may have paid close to full... No, I don't know if I paid full price for this one or not. But anyway, I love that cover. It's Earth X's 20th anniversary with Alex Ross and Jim Kruger. Oh, and it's an alternate realities issue. So Earth X was an alternate. We have so many alternate realities now, but in the Bronze Age, they were a little more rare. So this one discusses Marvel 2099, some Elseworlds. Did some of those come out in the Bronze Age? I wasn't sure about that. DC Imaginary Stories, which was a huge thing in the Silver Age, so I hope they decide to hit up the Silver Age a little bit. Anyway, so I love this back issue magazine, as many other people do too. And finally, I shelled out some money for this John Romita and All That Jazz hardcover book. It's basically 3 giant interviews with John Romita where he ends up, and I've read this far, that's why I have that marking there. He ends up talking basically about the history of comics as he experienced it and all the people he's worked with, and just gets into the thoughts of what different inkers were like, what the personalities of different people were. So this is, so far from what I've read, I read up to where I've marked here, but then I skipped ahead and I read a bunch of pages near the second half. So if you're like me and you're into all these details about the personalities and the approaches of different artists, like there's a lot of interesting talk about Gene Colan and how hard he was to ink, and how his deadline issues and worries, and how he needed to do 2 pages a month because he'd recently been divorced, and that was the only way he could support, 2 pages a day. And that was the only way he could support his family. But he wasn't that fast, so he's up to 3 a.m. every morning doing those pages. So I get the feeling back then, one of the biggest things on, because this came up a lot in a book I have on Sal Buscema also, one of the biggest things that all these artists had to do is learn how to do good work fast. And it was something they really struggled with and really focused on because that's what the industry demanded of them. And I think, yes, on one hand, it would be great if they could all draw really slow, but I think there was something to be said for the days when one artist would do, a huge long run on a comic book. Often the writers would change several times, like with Sal Buscema on the Hulk or Herb Trimpe on the Hulk. But the artist would remain the same and give the book this kind of consistency. But there were only some artists who could keep up the pace. I think in the Bronze Age, you see a lot of artists sort of come, do amazing work, and then kind of move on, like Bernie Wrightson or P. Craig Russell or people like that, or Barry Smith, because the kind of work they were doing, you couldn't do fast enough for what the comic book industry wanted at that time. Anyway, so there we are, diverging off in multiple subjects, doing a over 50-minute video. So only my most hardcore listeners or watchers, depending on how you do it, will have gotten this far. Thank you very much if you've come this far. And I will be back. I will be yakking more about comics. Take care, everyone.